I want you to imagine for a moment, if you will, as if every nuclear weapon on Earth was launched and detonated on all the major cities and towns of the world, and all the major dams and bridges and everything. And think of how much potential destruction that could bring. Almost unimaginable amount of destruction. We've had movies about it. We've had thoughts about it and talks about it and all the things, and nobody wants it, obviously. But as awful and extremely destructive as that would be, and the loss of life and the world just being changed forever, that would be a far less destructive, world-changing event than the flood was in Noah's day. Where we left off last week with Noah was the flood had come and destroyed the earth. It was the terminology used, that the earth had been destroyed, and the evil people on it, along with the earth. And we left Noah and his family and the animals there on the ark, and they've been on the ark for 6 or 8 months already, and the water has stopped rising, if you will. In chapter 8, as we get into Genesis chapter 8, in verse 1, we see that God remembers Noah. Now, when you see this expression where God's remembering something, it's not like God forgot about them, but it's now God's turning his attention to them again. Because the thing to notice about God in the Bible, even when he's working and communicating directly with someone, oftentimes there's large gaps of time between his instructions or the next message or something. Take Abraham, for instance, if you're familiar with the Old Testament stories about Abraham. I mean, he's going to go sometimes decades between messages from God, right? And so it's important to remember that God expects his people to kind of hold on with what he's given them. And then he gives them a little bit more, and he expects them to be responsible and mature, if you will. That he expects his words, his teaching, his commandment, whatever it is that he's doing at the time, to be sufficient for its purpose. He absolutely takes minute care of what he wants to get done, but he doesn't backseat drive, I guess, if you will. Now, he's absolutely in control. If you read the entire Bible, you'll see how he's in control of much more than sometimes we're willing to admit. But he's not really he's not overly possessive, if you will. So he expects growth, is I guess what I'm trying to get at. So God is now turning his attention to Noah. He's never forgotten about him. He's been there the whole time. He's always present. And he remembers all the animals and stuff on the ark. And God sends a great wind to dry up the water, right? Because one of the things we have is this story of the flood doesn't play out really like a fairy tale. It really doesn't. Because the water doesn't all dry up in 24 hours, right? Because the entire earth is covered, right, with water. It is flooded and all of that. Like the ocean floor. I mean, how long would it take for the ocean floor to dry up, right? It takes time. Even with the water receding back into the new oceans and mountains being formed and all the things, we can see the scars, evidence of the flood. Even with all of that happening, it's going to take 6 or 8 months for the ark, which lands in tall mountains, by the way, over in Turkey. It's going to take 6 or 8 months for them to see some dry land, right? And it's going to take months more for them to actually get off the ark. And that's what you see relayed through chapter 8. I'm actually not going to spend a lot of time talking about the sending out of the birds and stuff, which is an important part of the story. And if you're familiar with the story, it's probably a part you remember very well. I actually kind of want to skip to the end of the chapter and then look at chapter 9 a little bit. Because the lessons there, I believe, are probably have been well fleshed out before. The sending of the raven, the 2 doves, and all of that. So after the months have passed, after all the time spent on the ark, over a year, God says in verse 15 of chapter 8, go out of the ark with you and your wife and your sons and all the animals, all the families that are on the ark. All the families. Because everyone in the ark is part of a family. Just like everyone on earth who's going to be one of their children will be part of a family. It's so important for us to understand that not only do we all share our heritage with Adam, the first man, and Eve, the first woman, we're all related. We're all brothers and sisters, literally, and cousins of them. We also all share the same with Noah. We don't even have to track all the way back to Adam to get to a common ancestor with all men and women on earth. You can go all the way back to Adam. We're much, much closer than that. So any prejudice or racism or anything like that just is frankly absurd, because we're literally all related to one another. If that upsets you, well, that's just too bad. It's just too bad. So they all come out. They all come out by their families from the ark. And in verse 20, we see not the first, but one of the first examples of building an altar and sacrificing animals upon it. Noah builds an altar to the Lord, and he uses the covenant name of God, which is not really a topic of consideration here, but I'll just mention it. And he takes of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offers a burnt offering on the altar. Now you'll remember from chapter 7 and chapter 6 that it was 2 by 2, right? The two of each kind of animal. Well, that's partially true, but also 7 of all the clean animals: the sheep, the goats, the cows, the doves, lots of different kinds of animals. There's 7 of all of those. You might call them the domesticated animals. That's not exactly perfect, but it'll get you close. So he takes one of all of those and sacrifices them. Maybe the most expensive sacrifice that's ever been given by man. Maybe, because I can't think of anything more precious than saying, out of all the earth, I'm going to sacrifice 1/7 of this of all the cows, and 1/7 of all the sheep, and 1/7. I mean, think how many that would be in today's numbers. But he does it. He does it as the first thing he does when he gets off the ark, because Noah is a man who, before the flood, found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He is the righteous man. He has his priorities straight, if you will. He might a little bit. I don't know. I wasn't there. He's not running and kissing the ground. He's sacrificing to God, saying, thank you. Thank you. You are God. I am man. He understands his place. He's thankful. He's worshipful. He's respectful. He's everything that the world should have been. Because here, man and woman, Adam and Eve, their children were granted paradise on earth. And we lost it. But we still had a world handcrafted for us, even though sin had entered. And what did we do with it? We ruined it, was the expression. We corrupted and ruined that earth. And the Lord had to end the death and destruction and bring judgment. And so all this destruction came. And so Noah is what the people before the flood should have been like. Verse 21, the Lord smells this soothing aroma. And he says to himself, not to Noah, he says to himself, I'll never again curse the ground on account of man. Because man is evil, even from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done with the flood, is the point. While the earth remains, so as long as I've decided for the earth to remain, because the final end of the earth will come, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And that's God's promise to all of us, that as long as this earth goes, there will not be an end of the seasons, of the days, of the planting and the harvesting, all the things that are involved with the changing of the times that we associate with time. There won't be a change in that until the final end. You can count on tomorrow as long as God decides that there's going to be one, right? There won't be a destruction like the flood until the final end. And so God blesses Noah and his sons, and he tells them to be fruitful. He says the fear and the terror of you will be on every beast. Now, why is that important? Well, they have been hand-raising all the animals that are going to be on the earth some time now. They're all domesticated, for lack of a better word. They're all relatively tame. They've been hand feeding them in pens and such for a long time. So God's putting fear and dread of mankind on the animals so that the animals will spread out and mankind won't have pets of all the creatures. It's a good thing probably for both the men and the creatures that God does this. So the animals spread out, so that the people spread out. It's probably just a good idea, and that's what he does. But then he gives all the animals to mankind again. Now he'd already given us stewardship of everything in the garden, and that was not removed. But he gives them to us as food after the flood. I think there's a lot that's surmised based on this. A lot of people assume because of the destruction of the flood, and I tend to agree, that there was a large change in the way mankind was able to live. A lot of destruction of the perfect nature and the food and various things that we had access to. Because you'll notice if you trace the times people were living, as soon as the flood happens, the times people live drop off immediately. There's a few generations that live longer, but almost immediately people start living about the time we live, which is about 80 years or so. You can go read the Psalms and see that reference. For a few generations, they live longer, but it's one of the reasons Noah and his sons are going to live for a very long time, and even though they're not main characters, they're around for a lot of the history in the early part of Genesis. So that's kind of a tidbit. So he gives them the animals for food just like he's given them the plant, but then he warns in the next several verses from 4 till 7 that if you shed blood, if you kill and murder, the penalty will be death for you as well. And he's going to use fellow men. He's going to use fellow men and beasts to do it. He's going to bring retribution for things like spilling of blood. So innocent blood, obviously, because he's gonna carry out his own wars. So if you murder and kill, he's saying there will be punishment for that, a warning, and the taking of innocent life. Then this is the part I really wanted to get to, verse 8 through following. If you'll permit me to read a little bit, I hope you have your Bibles open, because I want you to see this. I think this is one of the most beautiful passages in this early part of the Bible. And it's important to realize, I believe, that you, as a breathing person, whether you believe in God or not, whether you're a Christian or not, and every person on earth, and even all the animals as well, are in covenant with God at this moment. Now, God has more than one covenant. There's the covenant in the New Testament where we have Jesus and his blood, but before that covenant, you were born into this earth. You were in a covenant with God, whether you accept it or realize it or not. And here's the covenant which he made. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, Now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. And that's how we're in it. And with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you. Of all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth, I establish my covenant with you. And all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood, neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. The earth will not suffer this kind of destruction again. Now, it's easy to get lost and think, oh, there was a bad flood. But that's why I started with the nuclear bomb situation. Because something far worse than all the nuclear bombs going off in the world had just happened. We cannot even perceive to imagine the destruction Noah and his family has just gone through. The destruction of everything they know and have even seen. The very land itself has been destroyed and remade, if you will. And he promises them and their children, he makes his covenant with them, saying, it won't happen like this again. I will never again send a flood like this on the earth. I promise. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant, which I'm making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow will be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and never again shall the water become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the cloud, then I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I've established between me and all the flesh that is on the earth. So the rainbow is what we call it. God calls it his bow. Now the bow is an implement of either hunting or war. For millennia, this is true. And in the Bible, a metaphor for God being at war is that he's preparing, he's got his bow and his arrows, and he's out to do war. He's been aroused to justice, to something along that nature. And the rainbow, as we call it the rainbow, we just say it quick, but the rainbow is God's bow symbolically hanging in the sky. The point is, it's not in his hand, right? Because if his bow is in his hand, he's about to use it, is the symbology. The symbology is it's hanging it up. It's like the old expression, hanging up the tomahawk. In other words, it's not in our belt or in our hand. I put it above the wood stove. I put it over the fireplace because I'm not using it right now. I'm at peace. I'm at rest. So God hangs up his instrument of war, which he just used to destroy the entire earth. He sent water. He sent the flood. He sent the rain. He sent the water from the depths to destroy the earth. And now he's hanging up his bow, saying, I won't use this to destroy all flesh again. And so when we see the bow, we have hope, we have assurance, we have remembrance of the real tangible cost of sin. Entire destruction of the world. That's what it costs. And it will again. And the entire destruction cost even God's own life at the cross. And so we have a taste of the real cost of sin, but we also have hope. We have hope in the promise of God that we do not need to fear what Noah and his sons had to witness and go through. But you'll notice in the text that wasn't the main point of the rainbow. I myself am guilty of running always to mankind's response to the bow of God in the sky. But did you notice what God said about the rainbow? He says, when I bring a cloud on the earth and I see my bow, which I have placed in the cloud, I will remember my covenant. That's verse 15. I will remember my covenant when I see my bow. In other words, the rainbow is more about God seeing his promise and saying, not yet. Not yet. I won't bring justice just yet. Because we see the destruction, we think, how could a good God do such a thing, right? Is the question we often ask. How could a good God destroy men and women and children and animals and little puppy dogs and all of it in a great flood? And how could he do it again in a fire, as the New Testament teaches us? How could he not, is my question. How could he not? If we had a camera and we set and if you sat in your living room and played on your TV a video of every evil act that happened every moment for the last 1,000 years, I don't know that if any of us had the power to destroy the earth if we wouldn't. I mean, think about it. If you had to witness every murder, every evil deed, I don't want to go into detail because I don't know who all's watching, and it's unpleasant to think about. It's abhorrent to think about. It's despicable. But if we saw it, I don't know how we could not bring justice, how we could not just bring an end to the pain. But God sees the rainbow, and he says, I'm at peace. I'm not going to destroy him with a flood again. And so the rainbow is mainly for God to see, is what the text teaches us, that he looks on the rainbow and he remembers his promise for the animals, for mankind, for the entire earth to remember that he is at peace in this way. Doesn't mean he's not going to be active, doesn't mean he's not going to bring judgment in the future. But he's saying, I won't do it like this again. I won't do it again. And this is where we end the story of Noah and the flood. As I'm filming this in the month of June, I'm reminded that at this current time we celebrate the colors of the rainbow in Sexual Perversion Month, or whatever you want to call it. But I encourage you to remember the real reason the rainbow exists. It's a remembrance of the real cost of sin, but a real hope for the future, a remember of restraint on the part of a just and powerful God who loves each one of us so much that he himself perished at our own hands so that we might have life. I thank you for joining me. This has been Biblical Musings on the Flood of Noah. Till next time, God bless.